Welcome to The Difference Engine, the show for founders, funders, and the category curious.
Don't confuse size, don't confuse valuation with category leadership.
I'm not the only person frustrated by this.
You disagree with my analysis.
I do.
You either acquire or you are acquired.
Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
And it's proof that you're winning the argument.
We all know history is written by the winners.
Hello, welcome to The Difference Engine. Today it's my pleasure to be talking with Pat Morrissey, currently Chief Customer Officer at San Francisco-based Hirevue. He's now transforming the way organisations discover, engage and hire the best talent. But previously, he was CMO at Altify, CRO at Simpplr, VP of Strategic Alliances, Industry ISV and Channel Sales at Salesforce, and VP Marketing at Business Objects, amongst other category leaders. And rumour has it, hailing originally from Iowa, he was once a childhood cheese model. Welcome, Pat Morrissey, to The Difference Engine.
Thanks, Jonathan. Great to be here.
We know, looking back, that Salesforce has an amazing category design record. Was Salesforce always going to be the CRM category leader?
I would argue, yeah, in hindsight, it is a no-brainer that Salesforce was going to be the leader in the clubhouse. And I think part of the reality of that discussion is they had just been very disciplined about telling a big story that really is focused on the world's a different place. We understand it uniquely, and we've got something for everybody. And I think that one of the things, Jonathan, that people miss about Salesforce is they have been fundamentally telling that same story for 20 years.
I gather Benioff's sort of keynotes at Dreamforce are things to behold in that respect.
No, yes, the faithful come from all over the world, but if you dissect that, and I know you do as somebody who's been in the communications industry for a while, they always start the same. And now there's a little bit of a Hawaiian dance when Dreamforce kicks off, but he goes through the power of the cloud and the 1-1-1 model and the transformation from, he always talks about some version of it started with, mainframe and went to client server and went to PC, and then ultimately it went to the cloud. And now there's a new thing. In this case, I think this year was all about AI. Surprise, surprise. But if you think back to the hindsight, they just had a different approach to the model, the business, the communication that they wanted to have, and actually their approach in the industry. And they have just been relentless about bringing that message to the masses, and you see that reflected in their business results.
Those business results are pretty damn spectacular, aren't they? I mean, in 10 years, they've gone from a turnover of 4.1 billion to the guidance for this year, which is 34.8 billion. I mean, that is relentless double-digit growth all the way through the pandemic, all the way through their current turndown. What happens internally in a company to take that category vision into this relentless execution machine which Benioff appears to have built?
The mistake that I think a lot of people make when they look at Salesforce is that Salesforce is some version of either a marketing company or an event company, and they do brilliant marketing and amazing events. But what I found when I got in the door was that they are just a very sophisticated, very disciplined, at scale sales machine that happens to have the benefit of having a CEO in Mark Benioff who has a really high marketing IQ and is really thinking creatively and differently all the time. And they go out with a mission to win and have from the very earliest days. I think if you think back to when Salesforce was founded, circa 1999, the first insight was that the old world of perpetual software and maintenance fees and CDs was just going to go the way of the dodo, and everything was going to move into what that at the time they were calling software as a service. Fast forward to 2008 when I was there, part of the insight there was software as a service is still kind of a clunky name. People don't necessarily get it, but the aspiration at that time was we're going to bring the platform and the applications together in one stack and really want to pervasively attack the enterprise. But more importantly, we need to simplify and elevate this entire conversation into what all of us know as cloud computing. Now, so I remember sitting in meetings and having, with the senior leaders of the marketing team, and we were looking at Google Analytics and a whole bunch of other data, the net of which was, we think this nascent thing called cloud is going to take off. We want to own that dialogue. Let's be all in on promoting and evangelizing this new thing about the cloud. And it was a way to really, again, elevate the conversation, differentiate the dialogue from what everybody else was having. And oh, by the way, hey, if the first inning was about software as a service, this is going to get even better, simpler, and more sophisticated. And Salesforce understands this uniquely, and we're going to bring this to you.
It's a very, very interesting, and I hesitate to use the word, but agile way of doing things. We know that one of the key things you can do when you're going on a category journey is develop a really compelling point of view. Now, it sounds to me that one of the things that Salesforce has been able to do is to constantly revisit, update, and move forward that point of view.
They have, and as well as they've taken liberties around what that looks like based on what's going on in the marketplace, right? So some things are consistent. They always talk about the power of the cloud being democratic. It's great for small companies and nonprofits the same way it's great for the biggest of the big organizations. And they talk about it in terms of being something for the enterprise that delivers value for everybody. But I think when you go back, and particularly you see this at Dreamforce, at various levels, they've talked about, well, the rise of the Service Cloud, and they talked about social enterprise for a while when that was very hot. And then they talked about IoT and the Internet of Things and so on and so on. There's always a new chapter being unfolded. And, if you look at, Dreamforce this last year, they very much were talking about, hey, this is all about the emergence of AI and really making that the feature attraction. And it turns out they were right on time, because now we're all talking about AI, right? So the core of where they come from remains the same, but their aspiration in terms of how do they bring benefit and value and a different point of view about how the world should work, continues to be something that is new and fresh every single year.
They certainly are a masterclass in evolving their category. If we can consider that Salesforce is one of the best, if not the best, as an example of tech category creation and evolution, which other companies would you consider as doing it well?
It's an interesting question, because I don't think, by and large, a lot of organizations do it that well. Part of the goodness of technology is that, everybody has the opportunity to create something new. And I think that's what's so exciting for me living in Silicon Valley is there's always a new thing. And that optimism and that breakthrough portends a lot of exciting opportunities. The challenge with that is, how do you talk about that? And a lot of organizations slip into a dialogue that ends up being, hey, my new thing is, better than your old thing because X, right? And if you're doing that, you're by definition playing in somebody else's sandbox. You're letting somebody else write the rules. And more importantly, you're not reframing the conversation in a way that gets to your unique insights. So the good news about, the technology marketplace broadly is, and we see this in the HR space and in the talent and recruiting space all the time. Everybody's talking about this giant move to skills. The problem with that is the giant move to skills looks remarkably like the old way they used to do all the same stuff before. So the buzzwords are different, but the core technology and the core approach is the same. So there's got to be a way to step back. And I think that's one of the things, particularly around category, that sometimes is misunderstood, is there's also an assumption that, particularly if you're in a technology space, which is where a lot of category related things happen, that it has to cost $1 billion. And it doesn't. It has to come from a place of culture and a place of aspiration. And I think that's what Satya and Microsoft have done over the last decade. That company is fundamentally different. They are still not great in terms of category creation, but they have the underlying culture and the aspiration. And you've seen that in their financial returns. You've seen that in terms of them being noted now as a great place to work, which wasn't necessarily the case. It might have been lucrative, it might have been functional, but it wasn't great. And I think there's some intersections here beyond just the how do we talk about what we do that are part of both bringing a category to life and then expanding what that looks like over time.
While we're talking about culture and personalities, I think it's self-evident that Mark Benioff has been a very, very important personality and cultural leader in the success that Salesforce has had in establishing itself as a category leader. Do you think there's any other lessons we can learn from this category machine that Salesforce has become?
I think there's a couple. Again, one of the mistakes that people sometimes make when they talk about category is that beyond it has to cost a lot of money, is that it is a sales conversation or it's a marketing thing that you do. It's a wrapper around the other stuff that you do. And in fact, no, it's not. It's a strategy. Like if the strategy was, we want to be pervasive at Salesforce and we want to grow, we want to bring the cloud to every single market space around the world. That's very much the aspiration. They were playing a platform game long before they were talking about being a platform, number one. The other thing, going back to the earliest days of Salesforce and even when they listed publicly, they talked about CRM. They had a vision around CRM and their ticker symbol is CRM. They sold a lot of sales automation, right? They did not have a fully fledged, it wasn't until they were 10 years in that they really had the entire suite that became CRM, but they were always framing the conversation in a much bigger way, talking about what does great look like and where do you want to go? And I think another thing of the many lessons you learn there is back to Dreamforce, and you commented on this a second ago. Years ago when I was at Salesforce, we used to talk about and plan for Dreamforce as wanting to be the Mac world of cloud computing. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that Benioff does very well. He's always got an analogy to paint the picture so people understand the fro too and where they're trying to go. But the aspiration was we want to bring the faithful together. We want to have education. We want to have entertainment, but we also want to have community. And I think part of the power of categories when they're done really well is you're creating a movement. You're creating something where people say, yeah, it shouldn't work like that. It should work like this. And I'm in, and I absolutely believe that. And if you can spark that belief and activate the people, and that's what you get at Dreamforce when they shut down San Francisco and everything becomes a Salesforce party for a week, is there are a lot of people who are just frankly true believers. There are some people who just believe that they're going to get great stock returns. They could care less about the technology, but they know what their portfolio looks like. And then you have exactly the opposite end, people who are not sophisticated or not in the financial markets. What they are is solving problems, and Salesforce is helping them solve problems and find other people like them with a shared interest and a shared focus on that. And I think that's part of the trick here, is really bringing that to life.
All our listeners who are thinking about the category journey should be starting to ask themselves, what's the reason to believe in what we're doing here?
100%.
Very close to home to you, I wanted to talk a little bit about the impact of AI on category and talent. And you're in both of those games in your current role at Hirevue, which have staked out the category of human potential intelligence. Can you just talk a little bit about your own work at Hirevue and the application of AI into this whole talent process?
Yeah, I think AI really brings scale, and it also reduces bias. And, kind of the brief history of time with Hirevue that, is coming up on 20 years now. In the early days, the founding story of Hirevue was the initial founder, Mark Newman, graduating with a business degree from a small college in Utah, aspiring to work on Wall Street and saying, hey, I want to work for Goldman Sachs. And he writes a letter to Goldman Sachs and he sends his resume, and Goldman Sachs writes back and says, sorry, we don't recruit at your school. Good luck. And his response was, that's not okay. I'm going to fix this. So we are the people that originally invented the category that became known as video interviewing. And in the old days, we used to take commercial cameras, put them in the post, send them to you so you could set it on your desk and say, hi, I'm Pat and I'm great for this job and let me explain, put it back in the post to you, download that file and send it to the company. So you fast forward to current times, and it took about 10 years, but Goldman Sachs became a customer of ours. And the CEO's been quoted talking about Hirevue, but what Hirevue allows Goldman to do is interview at scale globally for their intern and summer programs. So they recruit across 600 colleges and universities. Last year, they interviewed approximately 260,000 people for about 1,500 jobs. There's no human way to just throw bodies at that to have 250,000 interviews for a short summer piece if you don't have technology. And that's where AI comes in, allowing them to put together a process that allows them to put candidates into tiers and really decide who might be a fit, so that the talent team spend all their time with the candidates that are most likely to be the right match for Goldman, and to do it at scale.
It's a really interesting example, because to me, that's a precise example of different, not better. It's entirely different. Goldman Sachs could find some really, really good people at that little school in Iowa, which they'd have just missed before. What are the two things about using AI, other than this clearly powerful taking out of bias, that's going to make people go, I've no idea why we didn't do this talent acquisition process using AI before?
Yeah, the first thing I think to understand, Jonathan, is that all AI is not the same thing, particularly in hiring. So there's a difference between a static AI model and a learning model. So in the world of hiring, the first thing to understand is we're talking about a static validated model that's then locked. And what that means in actual practice then is when you run a candidate through something that's going to score them with AI, every candidate is treated the same. It's not an ongoing learning thing where you get the drift that you get with ChatGPT and some other things that it enables consistency and it reduces mitigation, and you come back annually to make sure it's working as intended and tune it so you're potentially driving the bias out of the model. That's the first thing. The second thing is if you don't do it both as a candidate or as a company, you're going to lose a lot of big opportunities. And I was speaking to somebody who runs talent technology at our customer advisory board earlier this year. And she said, we are promoting inside and outside in the community. We want people to follow the process and we want them to use AI because particularly for junior candidates and new hires and people coming out of university, if they don't go through the AI process, they basically guarantee they don't get the job. And I said, tell me why that is. And she said, well, we can't tell anything about you and what you're capable of based on your CV, particularly if you're just out of university where you have no meaningful work experience. And so I think that's the mind shift that people have to make, which is AI is really helping you decode potential. It is not something that's keeping you or is in some way relegating humans to the second seat. It is actually putting them in a position where they can really apply the critical thinking to understand who are those candidates, how do we get the best of the best for every single role in the organization. And if you don't do it, you're missing a trick.
Yeah, I think we just have to get used to the idea that AI is simply another tool, and human beings have been using tools for tens of thousands of years to get a better result.
If you rewind the clock back 5 years ago or even a year, there was a lot of fear of AI. AI is sort of this boogeyman black box thing. And in a hiring context, it got shorthanded to AI is going to take your job. Like suddenly we're down this path that, robots make all the decisions, and that, part of what we're missing here is the human connection. And I think one of the extraordinary things that's happened just in the last 12 months around this conversation broadly is the arrival of ChatGPT. Like the notion of a large language model isn't in of itself like only a year old, but the fact that it had a conversational interface and became accessible to everybody who had internet connectivity is a game changer. And what the statistics would say, and there's a whole bunch of places you can find this, but I would look at some Pew research. People went from fear to FOMO, and that they can't get into an AI conversation quick enough. You have kids, I have kids, like their approach that is all mobile, that is all AI. AI is your friend, and why would I do anything I didn't have to do if AI can just do it for me? I think portends a giant shift that we're just in the very early days of, and organizations are really going to struggle as they try to figure out how to make sense of that in their own hiring environments and with their own talent teams.
It's extraordinary the speed at which this has happened, as you say. I mean, can we possibly imagine in the early 1800s people going from absolute fear and loathing of steam engines to loving them within a year? That whole process took 50 or 60 years then, and now it happens almost immediately.
Exactly. And if you think a little closer to home, time-wise, that you and I both lived through, right, is like the introduction of mobile phones. And that's the compare here. Like Gen AI is expanding at a rate that mirrors mobile phones as one of the fastest growing things in history. So we're talking internet, the rise of the internet and the rise of mobility and so on. Gen AI is the next big wave that's about to crash. And it just is a game changer when you think about innovation and opportunity, as well as the idea that it's accessible to everybody.
You've got to learn to earn.
When you're driving a company to category leadership, and as you mentioned earlier when we were talking, it can be quite a long road. If you were to say, here are 3 things you must get right early on to get yourself properly on the rails of that journey, what would they be?
I think number one, you have to focus on what is different about your offer or your focus. What is the unique insight? Because there are lots of people who have lots of great ideas, and lots of those ideas have value, but The difference between good and great, kind of the 10x jump, is being able to frame a conversation in a completely different way such that people really say, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. Tell me more, right? If you can shift them and engage them, suddenly once they see it your way, they can't unsee it. So example, back to we used Salesforce as an example, and there's lots of pieces about Salesforce, but what they don't get enough credit for is, from a category perspective, is Salesforce is the company that invented the notion of customer success. That was later popularized by Gainsight and others, because the insight they had was if you buy something via a subscription, it's both easy to get you in the boat, it's also easy for you to leave if you're not getting value. And Salesforce is always priced as a premium, a premium play. So what they determined was they needed a human that they called a customer success manager that was all about providing best practices and how-tos, both from a business perspective and a technical perspective. And that fostered its own subcategory and its own sub-industry. And now what used to be just customer support is now customer success globally. So the first thing I think is you got to focus on that differentiated approach. The second thing that you need to do is be able to craft the story. Start with why. Why is this important? Why is this critical? Why is this something that you have to contemplate? And a lot of organizations, and particularly in technology, we spend a lot of time talking about bits and bytes and why you needed this and why our schmumble is better than the old schmumble, and nobody cares. Not just because they don't understand what schmumble is and why I need it, but they don't get how it fits into something that comes from an authentic place and is based on solving a problem. And then you've got to be relentless with that story. Back to, again, Salesforce being the same example. They've been telling fundamentally the same story for the last 20 years. It has new chapters. It has new exciting things that pop up. But you've got to be really disciplined in making sure everybody is telling the same story in the same way every single day.
Do you have any thoughts about how companies blow it? They might actually develop a category leadership position, then they'll do something which instantly invalidates that whole journey.
One of the things that they do is they don't think about category being pervasive in everybody's responsibility, meaning that whether you write code or you're in customer success or you happen to be the person on the front line doing retail or whatever, they don't understand what the value proposition and what the dialogue is and use it as a way to map back to mission, vision, and values, but also sense of behavior, right? So there's no connection between our aspiration about the world and how we're going to bring it to life. They also are really sloppy. The big mistake I think a lot of organizations make is it's sort of the flavor of the month. They treat it like a marketing campaign, not as a strategic initiative, and they don't play the long game. This is a years-long game to do it correctly, with the idea, again, that you need to change what the horizon looks like and continue to reset the rules. It was like, well, that was great for this year. It didn't really work, or we're not sure it worked, so we're going to try something else. And whatever advantage or that they might have had, it just gets lost.
Two really, really important points there, and it keeps coming through, is category is a strategy. It affects everybody in the organization, potentially in different ways. They may have different contributions to it, but as a leader, and I think the leadership's very important in this, you have to constantly impress upon everybody in the organization that category is their responsibility in various different ways, and it is the strategy of the company. And if you fail to do that, then I think the wheels quickly spin off.
The other thing you need to do is you need to have confidence of purpose and just lock it in. And sometimes it's hard to see, particularly when you're in a senior level role, something that you're now bored of that you've said so many times. People are just now starting to get, and I didn't really see it. We went through a category exercise when I was at Altify, and we were really in the sales tech space. And we put together a category about, customer revenue optimization. And we spent a lot of time training people and taking that message to market. And I think it was one of the critical pieces that helped to get us acquired. And the interesting thing post-acquisition was that I had a lot of people come back to me and say, hey, the new company that acquired us doesn't get our category. Like, they're breaking our thing. And even some people who are skeptical, right? There's nobody more skeptical than a senior salesperson who with 20 years experience, who's been very successful, and you try to teach them about a new way to talk about and do the thing, they're very resistant. And lo and behold, what you find out, and sometimes you need to have that discontinuous change before you actually get the data on another channel. But I had people who I thought were resistant and didn't quite get it come back to me and say they're screwing it up. Like we've lost the message on category. Like, what do we do? And it was simultaneously both really frustrating and really heartwarming that he finally, like, if I wasn't sure before, I got really clear after the fact that, in fact, we had 100% been down the right path and that people really got it, they internalized it, and that's critical for success.
You live at the epicenter of tech VCs, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about whether you think are VCs the category friend or the category foe. Times are tougher than they have been in decades. Are the VCs starting to think this is the opportunity to categorize for the next upturn, or are they so busy trying to consolidate their investments and strip costs out of their companies that they're not really looking?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Jonathan. I think there's a couple different things because the VC industry is no different than a lot of other industries insofar as during a downturn, you shake out, the pretenders from the people who are actually the experts in this, and having some money, of which lots of people have money. It's, that's always the dialogue for founders. If you're going to take money, you need to get really clear that it's good money and it has potential value add. And it points to the notion of category with the idea that, again, you're trying to get to a discontinuous change. It's a little bit the Peter Thiel, 0 to 1 kind of a theory here for a second, that you want to have ideally no competition, and you want to have VCs that will help you carve out your uniqueness such that you're just playing a fundamentally different game than everybody else. And I think there's really two sides of this coin in the current state right now, because the economy is not doing any of us any favors, and certainly VCs aren't writing checks for the fifth best version of the next iteration of Uber or whatever the segment is for a second. Like, if you're not first, you're last, and that's a little bit of a reality check in terms of you got to be that much better to get funded right now. But you also need to have, if you're going to go try to get VC money, you need to be able to tell a big story that says this is a mammoth opportunity. So not only do we see the world differently and we have defendable uniqueness, but this is a, hundreds and hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars opportunity. If you don't do that, you're going to have a real challenge. The flip side of the coin, too, going back to where we were talking about with AI, is what's happened just in the last year is there were more than 200 funding rounds of organizations that took more than $50 million. So while there's a lot of money on the sideline, there's a lot of money going into AI for specific use cases, both horizontally and vertically. And just having an AI something isn't good enough. People will write a big check if you've got differentiated approach, because the power of generative AI is not the AI itself. It's how it maps to data or other assets and other IP that you have to really change an experience.
But do you think there's been any change in the way that the VCs are viewing those investments, or are we in the middle of another little mini gold rush?
If you have something that is really unique in AI, there's a mini gold rush going on, and that's one of the things behind the narrative that San Francisco is back and is definitely the hub of this, which I think a lot of us in the Bay Area are rooting for, that we need San Francisco to be the shining star that it has been over decades. But it also, I think the VCs are, and because they're going to have problems raising their next fund if they're not, if they can't clearly point to success and possibility of returns in a world where everybody's tightening the belts, then the level of requirement to both, for the VCs to raise their next fund as well as for founders to get higher is that much harder. But I would say my observation from this seat is it's always been a little bit better to get category inputs and to get money in the States than it has been from European VCs. They think bigger, they have a higher risk tolerance, they're going to write bigger checks generally, and they're going to give you more runway.
And certainly Americans have always had a more positive mindset than Europeans, but I think it's about time the Europeans caught up.
I think so too, and I think that's one of the benefits of being in the Bay Area too, is there's just more optimism. I've lived through several downturns now, and hey, the problem we all are suffering through is money was basically free for the last, decade plus, and now it's time to recalibrate. That doesn't mean that there's not a massive amount of opportunity, and I think you're seeing that with Gen AI going to be the thing that helps, is one of the parts that feeds the engine to get us economically globally moving at a faster clip.
Is generative AI really a category?
That is a great question, but I think the short answer from my perspective, Jonathan, is no. That Gen AI is an interesting enabling technology, and you see that in the arms race going on with OpenAI. Microsoft's got a play. Now Elon Musk and X has a play with Grok. The Googlers have been cranking for a while and just introduced a multimodal approach to AI that's pretty revolutionary, but I would argue it's not a category unto itself. It is an interesting enabling technology. And that is something that the opportunity for founders and for innovators and for really any organization is to think about how to apply that technology in an innovative way to change the experience and drive business results. It's not a thing unto itself.
It's a progenitor then, at best. It's effectively coal. Coal is not a category, but it fuels literally a whole lot of categories in terms of engines, in terms of gas production, and so on and so on and so on.
Well, I think it has the potential to be jet fuel because it changes both how you code and what you can do. But I think particularly watching some of the children's toys and the visualization technology that's arrived, and the fact of the matter is that you can, with the right technology, spit out fully workable code and websites and prototypes and the whole thing. So it further has lowered the barrier in terms of what's possible for an individual or for a founder to do something really meaningful in a way that has a lot more applicability and dimensionality than coal does. But I think fundamentally you're spot on, right? This is a massive accelerator and a massive opportunity for organizations to think different and really get an outsized benefit from that technology and really accelerate what they're in business to do.
Things have settled down with OpenAI, and they, along with a number of other generative AI competitors, are going to be the enabling technologies that will allow a lot of AI-based categories to develop.
I think that's right. And we'll find that a couple of years down the path where people don't even talk about generative AI anymore because it's just a thing that everybody has. It's not a thing unto itself.
Thank you for listening. If you want to learn more about Pat Morrissey and Hirevue, go to hirevue.com. That's HIREVUE.com. If you want to explore further the category design topics discussed in this episode, please read our blog posts at becategorical.com or tune in to other episodes of The Difference Engine wherever you get your podcasts. And going into 2024, if you're in the tech business and need a strategy to categorize, then of course we can help. Get in touch with us via the show notes or at becategorical.com. And remember, don't be better, be different.